The afternoon sunlight slanted through the lace curtains, casting soft patterns on the polished hardwood floor. I had barely stepped into Grandma's living room when her sharp eyes found me. There was a flicker of curiosity, then disappointment, a familiar expression that always made my chest tighten. She tilted her head, pursing her lips, and in that deliberate, slow way she had when she wanted to make a point, she asked, "Why are you using Uber? Where's the Volvo we gave you?" For a moment I froze. My hand lingered on the car door handle outside, the bitter scent of exhaust clinging to my clothes, the faint hum of a waiting Uber driver in my mind. I wanted to laugh, wanted to tell her it wasn't about the car, that I liked independence, but the words lodged in my throat. Instead, I felt that old familiar ache, the sting of being judged not for who I was, but for failing to meet the expectations she had etched into my life like a stubborn engraving. The Volvo, I remembered it perfectly, the day it had been handed to me like a prize I never asked for, its leather seats stiff and cold, the keys heavy in my hands. Grandma had said, "This is for you, don't embarrass the family." At the time I had nodded, polite and obedient, but inside I had seethed. The car was a symbol of control, not love, a gilded cage masquerading as generosity. Her voice, calm but dripping with judgment, snapped me back. "You could have at least tried to make an appearance. People will talk, you know." I forced a smile, a fragile barrier against the rush of emotions. I had thought, maybe, that she would notice my small victories, the quiet independence I had carved out, the hours of work I poured into projects she never asked about, the friends I had made who saw me for me and not for what I drove or wore, but today all of that seemed invisible. I thought Uber would be simpler. I said, my voice tight. "Traffic's bad, and I didn't want to. Excuses." She interrupted, slicing through my words like a knife. Her eyes softened briefly, but it was only a fleeting shadow before the disappointment returned. "You always have an excuse. I raised you better than this." I wanted to tell her that her version of better had always felt suffocating, that the life she planned for me was polished and perfect on the outside but hollow, that her love came with conditions, and that every time I strayed even slightly from the script she wrote, she had a way of making me feel small, insignificant, unworthy. Instead, I nodded again, swallowing the bitterness. There was a quiet rage simmering inside me now, when I had learned to hide behind polite smiles and obedient nods. But today, it was awake. Today, I felt it stretch its claws around my heart. Whispering that humiliation was temporary, but cunning was powerful, I left her house that day with the hum of the Uber engine beneath me, a strange combination of shame and determination settling like armor around my ribs. Grandma had no idea that this simple, cutting question, the kind she had asked so many times before in different ways, was planting a seed that would grow quietly, methodically into something that neither of us could have anticipated. I clenched my fists in my coat pockets and stared out the window as the city blurred past. They thought they were teaching me a lesson. Little did they know I was learning one of my own: patience, observation, and the art of sweet, inevitable revenge. The city hummed around me, but inside the Uber, time seemed to stretch and bend. The sunlight reflecting off the windows made patterns on my lap, and I stared at my hands as if they might give me answers. Every passing car, every honking horn, felt like a reminder of the life I was supposed to live, the life Grandma had scripted for me, polished and predictable, with a Volvo parked in the garage like a trophy to display to the world. I thought about the first time I had noticed the subtle weight of her expectations pressing on me. I had been 12, opening a neatly wrapped box containing my first responsibility gift, a planner, leather, bound, embossed with gold letters spelling my name. She had looked at me, eyes sharp with pride, and said, "Use this wisely. It will decide how people see you." At the time I had nodded, trying to hide the confusion and unease. Later, I realized it wasn't guidance. It was control. The Uber glided through traffic, and I replayed every conversation, every small betrayal, every comment that had made me doubt myself. How she would remark casually about my spending, my friends, my choices, always the subtle sting that suggested I was never enough, and yet it wasn't just her. The family, the distant relatives, even old friends, so many had fallen into the same pattern. Admiration that came with judgment, love that felt conditional. I had spent years silencing my own desires to fit a mold I never asked for. But today, That seed planted in her living room had begun to sprout. I realized the truth. My shame wasn't permanent, but my ability to take control of my life could be. The anger that had simmered quietly for years was no longer just pain. It was energy, and I would use it. I would craft a life so distinctly my own that the world, and especially Grandma, couldn't ignore it. I thought about revenge, but not in the way most people imagined. I didn't want shouting, confrontation, or cruelty. That would be petty, and I had learned long ago that the quiet, calculated approach was far more satisfying. No, my revenge would be subtle, elegant, undeniable. It would be a reflection of everything I had absorbed over the years: patience, intelligence, and the ability to see people for who they truly were, not the masks they wore. A soft shiver ran through me as the Uber slowed at a light. Outside, the city moved with indifferent energy, oblivious to my personal storm. I pictured the future, a future where I succeeded on my own terms, where I was admired not for the wealth or status bestowed upon me, but for my own strength and ingenuity. I imagined the look on Grandma's face when she realized that I had outgrown the cage she had so meticulously built, when she realized that Volvo, the gifts, the expectations, they were irrelevant. I had become untethered, unstoppable, and painfully free. By the time the Uber pulled up to my apartment, the quiet rage had transformed into clarity. I was no longer just a person reacting to humiliation. I was a strategist, a thinker, a force quietly gathering strength. The humiliation had lit a fire, and I would tend it carefully, letting it grow into something beautiful and sharp, something that would teach lessons without a single word raised in anger. Stepping out onto the sidewalk, I inhaled deeply, letting the crisp air fill my lungs. The world felt different now, sharper, promising, alive with possibility. And as I watched the Uber disappear into the crowd, I smiled faintly, almost imperceptibly, knowing that first moves of my plan had already begun. Months passed, each day like a brushstroke in a carefully painted picture. I moved quietly, deliberately, letting no one glimpse the full plan taking shape beneath my calm exterior. On the surface, I was polite, still courteous to Grandma, still attending dinners and family gatherings with a smile that hid everything. But underneath, I was building something stronger than her Volvo, something she could never give me: independence, recognition, and the quiet satisfaction of proving her wrong without a word of confrontation. I started small, taking control of the little things she had always judged me for. I refinanced my own debts, managed my own finances, and pursued opportunities she had scoffed at, jobs and investments she claimed were beneath our family name. Each success was a small victory, a tiny crack in the carefully constructed world where her opinion ruled. The sense of empowerment was intoxicating. The more I achieved, the sharper the contrast became between her expectations and my reality. Then came the subtle social reversals. Invitations to family events started shifting, not because I demanded them, but because my independence had made me desirable in unexpected ways. Friends, colleagues, and even distant relatives began asking for my advice, my insight, my help. I watched as Grandma's eyes followed me during gatherings, tracking my confidence, the effortless way I drew admiration without effort. She couldn't say a word, couldn't stop the tide of respect that seemed to gravitate naturally toward me. Business ventures flourished too. I turned ideas into reality, showing skill and judgment that even Grandma had to notice, though she would never admit it. I took pride not in flaunting wealth, but in the subtle acknowledgement that my achievements were my own. She would glance at my apartment, my car, a modest yet sleek vehicle I had chosen, one that fit my life rather than her image, and I could feel the recognition that she had underestimated me. The turning point came during a family gathering, a dinner meant to celebrate her birthday. I arrived, not in a borrowed luxury, not in a Volvo that screamed status, but in a car that reflected who I had become, polished, practical, and entirely my own. She gave me the familiar, disapproving glance, the one that had haunted my childhood, and I met it without flinching. "Why didn't you use the Volvo?" she asked, curiosity laced with lingering judgment. I smiled softly, letting the words carry the weight of all I had accomplished. I've found that the things we inherit, it don't always fit the life we want to live. I prefer this, it suits me better. The room went quiet, as if the walls themselves had stopped to listen. It wasn't arrogance, it wasn't defiance. It was simple truth, and in that truth I could see the realization dawning in her eyes. I had grown beyond her expectations, beyond her carefully constructed measures of success. It was sweet, the kind of revenge that didn't wound but illuminated. The humiliation she had tried to inflict, the judgments she thought would control me, had all become the scaffolding for my victory. I had risen quietly, meticulously, proving that independence, patience, and self-respect could be more powerful than wealth or inherited privilege. As the evening wore on, I caught her watching me again, a flicker of something softer in her eyes. Maybe pride, maybe regret. I let the moment linger, savoring the satisfaction that comes not from destruction, but from undeniable, elegant triumph. The first snow of the season dusted the city in delicate white, and I found myself standing by the window of my apartment, watching it settle silently on rooftops and trees. It had been nearly a year since that afternoon with Grandma, the day her sharp questions had ignited something I hadn't realized was smoldering inside me. The memories of that moment had softened but never vanished. They had become a quiet compass guiding every choice I made. I had changed. The person who had once felt small and judged for taking an Uber instead of a Volvo was gone. In her place stood someone deliberate, confident, and patient, shaped by the lessons of subtle observation and careful planning. But with all victories came reflection, and I found myself thinking about Grandma, not just the critic, but the woman who had given me a foundation, flawed as it was, to build upon. The next family gathering arrived, and I attended with the same quiet confidence I had cultivated over months. Grandma was there, her hair slightly grayer, her posture not as rigid as it once had been, yet her gaze was as keen as ever. I felt no fear, no resentment, only a calm certainty. She looked at me and hesitated, as if measuring the distance between who I was and who she had envisioned me to be. "You seem different," she said softly, more curious than judgmental. I smiled, not triumphantly, but with gentle acknowledgement. "I've learned to live life on my own terms," I said. "It turns out, it suits me better." For a moment, she was silent, and I could see the weight of realization pressing on her. She had expected rebellion to be loud, visible, perhaps even destructive, but my path had been quiet, deliberate, elegant. It was revenge, yes, but in the form of undeniable self-respect and success. A lesson she hadn't anticipated. Later, as we sat down to dinner, Grandma's eyes lingered on me a little longer than usual. There was no overt apology, but a subtle softness, a willingness to recognize that the world had shifted slightly, that her control over me was no longer absolute, and I realized then that this, more than any car or gift, was the sweetest reward, acknowledgement earned not through confrontation, but through the quiet power of being myself. I had achieved everything without needing to strike or retaliate in anger. Each success, each decision made independently, was a silent message. I was whole, capable, and unshackled by expectations. Grandma had given me a starting point, and I had turned it into a launch pad for my own life, proving that freedom and dignity are more enduring than judgment or inheritance. As the evening wound down, I found myself alone with her for a brief moment. She reached out, touching my hand lightly. "I didn't understand," she murmured. "You did," I said softly, squeezing her hand. "I just needed to find my own way." There was a pause, a quiet recognition that words could not fully capture, and in that pause I felt closure, not just for the humiliation she had unintentionally inflicted, but for the years of unspoken tension, the subtle betrayals, and the pressure to conform. Walking home later, the snow crunching beneath my feet, I felt lighter than I had in years. Revenge had been sweet, yes, but not cruel. It had been a lesson, a triumph of patience and self-respect, a story that would stay with me forever. I smiled to myself, knowing that the most powerful victories are the ones that transform you from the inside out, and in the quiet, drifting snow, I felt truly free.